Hello and welcome to episode 18 of the Verbal to Visual podcast. I'm your host, Doug Neal, and on this show, you get to listen to one-on-one coaching calls that I have with folks who are developing and using their sketchnoting skills. Today, I'm chatting with Wen Yang, who is studying data science and experimenting both with kind of the balance of analog and digital tools, and also with different types of sketchnoting workflows, trying to find those that work well for data science in particular. So those are the topics that we chat through today. I think this episode will be great for anyone who is working in the sciences as well. And this episode also has a video version if you'd like to watch us chatting. You can find that video along with show notes for today's episode at verbaltovisual.com/18. Let's get into it.
Myself, I'm a data scientist, so I really enjoy to using Sketchnotes to learn data science concepts, models, algorithms. I think it's really easy for me. It really helps me to think and digest the idea. And also, I thank you so much for doing this. And I do have some questions. And so before you provided me this, I actually started to write more like, this
cool.
way. It's more of, so I start with my typical use cases, how I use Sketchnotes. So I think there are two major categories. Number one is for like work or data science related. And usually what I like to do is I use Sketchnote for learning a data science book or data science related online courses to understand the ideas. And so sometimes it will involve something like this. So you will see this is kind of a typical, they will show you what's the bias and variance trade-off. So I will probably write something there and I will add the typical graph down below just for me to a little bit easy to recall what's the things about that. And usually after this, I will like to incorporate a code snippet. So basically it's the code to implement this idea. And the way I can do this is I usually use the app called Notion, because Notion is kind of like the taking notes app, but it's much, I like it, but previously I using Evernote. I switched to Notion because it's so easy to incorporate code snippet. And so I think for work and also in term, so I guess when I try to apply the typical use case, when I try to convert from pen and paper to the digital, I found this is also I found okay. So those are the challenges I'm experiencing. Like, and this is the pen and paper version I found, and this is the iPad plus stylus. So the first challenge I'm experiencing is the slowness and inefficient. And I identify the potential causes. Potential cause number one is probably because I'm using the tool, the iPad mini 2 plus stylus. So it's not the best tool combination for create the kind of the digital notes. So this actually leads to question number one is, if I wanted to incorporate this maybe for long term, does it make sense? Or do you think this tool is actually sufficient, or actually there's something I should consider about upgrading my tool? And then the second potential cause is probably because of me lack of practice. I haven't really get used to it. So I think this part actually can be solved at times. So this is actually called no steps. And then the third part, the third potential cause, I think it's actually because, there's a saying for you should not write your novel and editing at the same time. So I find for digital note, I often do this is because when I write something on the notebook, even the small mistakes actually doesn't bother me that much. However, if it's in the good notes or in the iPad, I found myself just compulsively to use the eraser to just wipe the strokes or do something like that. So I think question number 2 is, how do you approach this writing and editing mode for that? So yeah, so and then my third question is, actually, I really like your ideas about read a book and do notes chapter by chapter. So I wonder, do you also have like the recommended cadence for podcast and online courses? So this is more related to the category number 2, is the personal leisure or personal kind of usually how I do, how I listen to podcasts, and I also watch online courses. And what's your recommended cadence? Do you like watch the whole episode and then do the notes, or while you're doing the notes, do you go back? And so yes, those are the 3 questions.
Nice. Lots of good questions there. Thanks for sharing what you're up to and kind of outlining the things you're thinking about. I love how much you kind of seems like you've jumped into sketchnoting and you're like doing a lot of cool things with it, and even just the experiments with the like
Because
analog tools. Yeah,
I've been
what's your
following
background?
for a
How did
lot.
you get into sketchnoting and find out
Yeah,
about verbal to visual?
so I guess previously for a very long time, I don't like to taking notes. I like to remember everything in my head. And I especially enjoying that I don't take notes, but I can still recall all the things about that. And I especially don't like writing lots of text, but I do find for organizing information, later I found out I like to use mind map. And I guess when I was browsing, trying to find the app for mind map, I actually, thanks to YouTube algorithm, they recommended your video probably back into 2017 or something like that. And I
Nice.
just find your sketch notes, it's the best kind of format. Really works for me. It's very easy to recall information, and it's a perfect process to digest information. So I started to slowly incorporate that. And I also bought a book you recommended before, like for the sketch notebook. So I also try to, when I have time, try to incorporate a little bit more labels for that. So yeah, I've been mainly using the kind of the paper version. Yeah, but
Nice.
of course, yes, because I saw you started to switch from paper to digital, and I also find there's a benefit to do that decluttering. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I've been thinking about based on your questions and the tools that you're using, since you're kind of playing with both of those types of tools as well. I might start just by outlining kind of like my current thoughts about the analog and digital balance.
Right.
Because like you've mentioned, like most of this past year, I've been doing a lot of experimenting with what digital sketchnoting looks like. And I do kind of feel lucky to have like the big iPad Pro. And that's where like I do feel like screen size does play a little bit of a role. I'm not sure how big is the iPad mini? Do you have
iPad
that
mini
to?
it's very small. It's like it's similar to my notebook.
Okay, that's kind of interesting that there's like a
Yeah, it's
parallel
very
there between
small.
like notebook page size and screen size. Um, Yeah, so I guess kind of what I've been on the lookout for then, since I've been experimenting with those two types of tools, similar to the questions that you're asking here, like when do I want to use pen and paper
Right.
and when do I want to use digital? Um, and right now for reading books, I'm continuing with the kind of chapter by chapter note taking that I shared in a video. But I've actually I've kind of committed to doing that for the entirety of that book. But I think what I've landed on now is that when it comes to reading books, I think I just so much prefer reading pen and or reading a physical book and like underlining and making notes in the margins. I found that I enjoyed that reading experience better. Uh, and I kind of am able to read books more quickly. Like when I
Mm,
read on a digital screen, there's like a fatigue that I notice
mm,
that kind of keeps me from fully kind of getting into the zone with that and spending as much time as I might like to spend. Um, so what I think is going to be my go-to note-taking process for books is um, reading a physical book, underlining and making notes in the margins, and doing that all the way through. Um, and then going back, and I think I shared this process in a separate video that I can share. Going back and doing really rough pen and paper sketch
mm,
notes, like 1 page per chapter, because that gets at the dynamic that you mentioned between like when you're sketchnoting on a tablet where you can edit and do all the finesse, like it's easy to do the like writing and editing at the same time, or
right,
sketchnoting and editing at the same time. Um, which yeah, can make it harder to get into a good flow and get you too caught up in how the thing looks.
right.
Um, so that's why I'm kind of leaning for reading books, at least kind of leaning back toward doing 1 page chapter sketch notes that are real rough. Like they're just for me, right? Like that stage of the sketchnoting is still just for me to wrap my head around the set of ideas within that single chapter on that 1 page. Um, and with that type of workflow, I find that uh, it's not uncommon to be able to do those chapter summaries, maybe all in like one sketchnoting session. Like I'll do the whole book that way, or maybe a couple spread out over a couple of days. Uh, so that gives me like a pretty good big picture overview of what the book is all about. Like I can kind of zoom in on any individual chapter by like picking up the 1 page sketch notes of that chapter. But then it's at that stage that I might want to bring in a digital tool. Um, so if I decide that like I want to create a little bit more polished visual summary, maybe like a mind map of the entire book, like at least the big ideas from the entire book, or maybe there was just like one chapter that had some ideas that I really wanted to remember. That's when I might take my kind of rough first draft sketch notes that I did on pen and paper and then go to a tablet and do something a little more polished. Um, so it's almost like using the digital tool as for like the final draft only, if I want to make the ideas more presentable, maybe just more presentable to me, or maybe I actually want to present those ideas to other people in some form.
I see.
So that's one the scenario in terms of like how I'm thinking about the balance between analog and digital. The other thing I'll mention is that I do enjoy using digital first if I'm sketchnoting a conversation live. So there's
Mm,
another video where I share like a full hour of me sketchnoting a podcast conversation. And what I enjoy about using a digital tool for that is I go with a mind map approach, like you mentioned, and I use Concepts, which is an infinite canvas tool, and it's a simple enough approach. Like I don't go real heavy into the imagery. It's mostly just kind of mapping out those ideas and connections that I hear as the conversation's going on. um, that there's something about the editability of that process, because I can kind of like select sections of the mind map and move them around. And, if I need to erase, I can erase in editing. So like the limited amount of editing that I do helps me kind of keep doing it all live. So I would say that's the main scenario that I'm imagining right now for kind of going with an iPad first approach, is if it's like that live setting where you want to keep up with a mind map maybe, but you still have the ability to edit and move things around. Yeah, so those are kind of some of my thoughts initially about pen and paper and digital. Is there anything about what I just described that kind of stands out to you?
Yeah, I think it totally makes sense. And yeah, I guess the things, yeah, so I guess my follow-up question is, how do you solve the writing at the impulsiveness to do writing and editing at the same time, or you've already trained yourself to? Because
Yeah.
especially, so
I guess so.
yeah,
When I'm doing the like pen and paper sketch notes, I think what helps me stay in not worrying about editing mode is I guess first that I know that those are only for me. So I don't really like care about how they look. Uh and I also tend to move quickly enough that I'm not afraid to like make a mistake on a diagram or something and like just cross it out and try doing it again. So because of like that workflow, there's uh, no repercussion for like just doing the thing over again, which I guess in some ways is a form of like editing while I'm doing it. But it doesn't feel that way. There's kind of like a freedom that I feel like comes with it, uh, because I'm just doing it for myself. Um, I think what also helps too is just knowing that pen and paper note taking is kind of just like it's one stage of my
right.
overall sketchnoting process, right? Like I'm going to have the opportunity to do something more and maybe like better, maybe deeper with those ideas after I finish those pen and paper notes. Um, and that's probably how I would approach the types of books that you're reading and the online courses that you're taking, because I'm guessing that through those books and courses, like your primary goal might be to get a good overview and understanding of the subject of that book that you're reading or the course that you're taking. But once you go through it all, you might realize that, oh, like this chapter is the most relevant to my work right now. So I want to spend a little bit more time. Like I've got my rough notes from that chapter. I want to like spend a little bit more time on them, because I know like those are the concepts that are showing up at work right now or something like that. Is that an accurate description of kind of like the books you're reading and the courses that you're taking as far as like the topics relationship to the work that you're doing right now? How would you describe that?
So actually, it's more or less similar, but a little bit different is because the data science book usually is very thick and they cover many, many subjects.
Yeah.
Instead of I reading the whole book, actually, maybe I was doing supervised learning for my work right now, and I'm especially interested in the hyperparameter tuning. I'm actually only going to read the chapter about hyperparameter tuning first.
Mm.
So I will read the whole chapter about this
Hmm.
subject, and then try to just free recall what I can think of. And after free recall process, I just kind of capture or create the ideas I think it's most relevant for me to implement. Then I started to use the Notion to type the code and to fire them together, and just I like to maybe just take a picture of the sketch note and then screenshot as a picture and put it in Notion. That way I know, oh, so after looking at the screenshot, I know that's the thing, that's the points I was thinking about, and the below is just the code snippet, how to implement this. So that's also, that's actually one of my initial question about the workflow content organization, but I think you've already had the workflow lesson. So that's also a known step already. Yeah, so I guess my final question is, do you feel like it's actually worthwhile? Maybe it's not a fair question. I think it's a very subject to person by person. Do you think it's worthwhile to upgrade tools? Maybe even if not right now, maybe for relative long time. But I guess this kind of digital tools, they also tend to get outdated very fast. And of course, I don't want to clutter bring of paper. I also don't want to clutter of digital devices.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Because those can kind of gather almost just as quickly as as other things these days. That's a great question. One thing I wanted to point out before I forget too is that I feel like what you spoke to about kind of working through a data science book, to me that maybe highlighted like one of the questions that kind of comes my way fairly frequently is how to sketchnote kind of the hard sciences compared to like the humanities, maybe, which is where I tend to spend more of my time. And the way you described it there, like, I think it might be the case that when you're learning something like data science, um, the chapter by chapter sketchnoting and kind of putting into practice the ideas that you're learning after each chapter, I feel like that makes a lot of sense for data science or for like, yeah, anything involving, I don't know, like learning to code or like learning certain areas of math, like those types of subjects. I can see that waiting until the end of the book to try to like bring everything together just isn't going to give you the practice with those ideas that you'll need, which is where chapter by chapter sketchnoting makes a lot of sense, which I feel like contrasts in some ways to maybe some of the books that I read about, creativity in general, or yeah, books where it might make, you won't necessarily lose out on impact if you wait until the end of the book to bring everything together. So I thought I'd point that out just for folks listening or maybe watching this, that like that could be an interesting way to think about the difference between working with hard sciences and maybe more soft sciences or humanities. And then, so to get to your question too, I would actually love to hear about Notion for a second, because that's a tool that I've seen a little bit of. I haven't used it myself, but I could see it, particularly with folks that are more kind of like science minded and coding related. They might be interested in Notion as well. How would you describe kind of how Notion works? And you mentioned this a little bit again, but how you're kind of adding sketch notes into your use of Notion.
Right. So I guess the maybe a lot of people are already familiar with Evernote or maybe OneNote. So I just compare Notion with those two familiar tools. Evernote, usually what you can do is you can write some kind of free text, and you can also use some of template. However, it's not very you can also use that for maybe creating kind of like the to-do list. So they're like using bullet points to organize your notes. What's really different from Notion, especially, I think Notion will be very, very appealing for people who write code, is because they not only having the grammar like usually you will just type, but they are also using are using markdown file. So basically you just type /code, then you can implement a code snippet. And if you, let's say if you use, if you wanted to find an emoji, you just type colon and maybe smiley face, and then there's already a smiley face. And the best benefits is most of the notes is you organize them by folder under folder and the folder. So it's more, they have a hierarchy of that. But I think for Notion, what they can have is they allow you to basically create infinite loop of your notes. So you can have maybe, let's say you wanted to find a job, and then you can create first you can start create your personal wiki page, and maybe your personal wiki page and this is also part of the function, it can serve as a database of yourself. And in your personal wiki page, you will have maybe resume and the reading list, and also maybe the personal projects you wanted to pursue, and maybe of some other things. So you maybe have 4 quadrants of the things all under your personal wiki. And each one of them, they can have infinite loops of linking to different nodes. And each one is actually can also serve as a database. When you, let's say, under the reading list, you can have name of the books you're reading, and the reading list can also including a media type. It could be a podcast, it could be a book, because modern reading is not just including books, including maybe videos or articles or papers, and you can sort them by type. And then you can add notes to each of them. And under the column of notes, you can also insert a page, which is also another note. You can write all your reviews. And so basically they have the infinite loop to allow you to organize information. So I hope you that's kind of I think so to summarize is they allow you to have create a database of your notes, and they allow you to organize just not only like folder by folder, but it's more of based on the relationship you wanted to map them. And the third part, I think it's especially appealing to coders, is they allow you to use a lot of, when you write wiki or you write GitHub, the markdown kind of grammar, you just do / and then there's lots of shortcut you can immediately to fulfilling the normal kind of purpose when you are writing code.
Yeah, it sounds like such a powerful tool, and especially those kind of like the way that you can link different media files and like sections of your notes to each other. It feels like a powerful tool for those connections. And then also, as you mentioned, kind of like the database aspect of it. So yeah, it sounds like a powerful tool.
Without building the database by yourself.
Right.
So it's very easy, and they have a fantastic tutorial from the YouTube channel, the official page. So I would suggest for people who are interested just to start with the beginner tutorial and also search. I think I find the most useful ones is to build your personal wiki and create a reading list, and also create something about maybe the work notes, something like that.
Yeah. It's interesting. Probably using the term wiki just makes me think that like it's almost like you're creating your own like personal Wikipedia. Like like there's a little bit of an analogy there, just in terms of like what that feels and looks like. Because I think folks are, familiar with Wikipedia and kind of can imagine like, oh, how cool would it be to be able to like organize your own like knowledge in a format that's something a little bit like that. Cool. How long would you guess would it take for a person to get up to speed with, to using Notion? If let's assume they're familiar with like Evernote. and they're making that transition maybe.
Right. I think for people familiar with Evernote, probably take 1 or 2 days. They can definitely to implementing all the things you can implement in Evernote. But for people who are actually programmers or coders, they will probably spend another 2 or 4 days trying to so I think, yeah, it's actually, I think the grammar using coders is actually really, really easy for people who are not coders. Anyone within 1 week, they will be able to build their own personal wiki and started to organize information like that.
Nice. That's cool. Thanks for sharing your experience with Notion. I've watched a few YouTube videos about it, but I haven't had the chance to like talk to someone who uses it regularly. So I appreciate you letting me pick your brain. And maybe to end things, let's get to that question about like when is it worthwhile to upgrade tools, which I feel like is kind of an ever-present question. And I feel like there might be a couple scenarios that might like push you over to upgrading. One is just like thinking about if there's a major roadblock with your current tool. Like I was trying to distinguish, how do you differentiate between like a want and a need, right? Because there are so many interesting good tools out there. Like sometimes it is just a want, and it can be hard to know the impact of starting to use that new tool. Uh, so what that major roadblock might look like within the realm of sketchnoting, we've been talking about like iPad mini versus iPad Pro. Uh, like if you were maybe using something like concepts on your iPad mini, let's just say doing like the example that I shared earlier, trying to sketchnote live a conversation. Um, and if you kept running into the barrier of like having to pan and zoom like every 10 seconds or something like that, right? Like if the small screen interrupts your workflow to the point where like you can't do the thing that you need to do, um, that might be something that I would consider like a major roadblock that would be worth considering like upgrading to a bigger device. Um, Especially if that roadblock occurs within some use case that like you're engaged in regularly. So if you like go to meetings every day and you're using this thing in that way every day, then like the impact of a new tool is almost like exponential if you use it regularly like that. Um, yeah, so that's kind of like maybe the most important thing to pay attention to if your current tools are resulting in a major roadblock. Uh, and I guess the other one is mainly just like, well, you could wait till that one breaks, and then you like absolutely need to replace it. Um, I'm curious how if you have thoughts about the roadblock question. Do you feel like the with what you've used so far with your iPad mini, like are you running into major roadblocks?
Well, I guess my roadblock is when I trying to use iPad to do sketchnoting. That's definitely a roadblock for me to actually document things because it's slow, and I found that I always stop, I always pause. Because previously what I thought is, but I like what you're saying, that is trying to think about is the your current tool blocking your process. Current tool actually including this version actually works pretty well. So maybe for right, at least momentarily or at least for short term, I'll just keep implementing this, but learn the digital process along the way. And maybe also identify some of the things I think it's slowing me down is lack of practice on the good notes in iPad. So maybe after I get more familiar with that, and I also feel confident to switch from paper to iPad, maybe that's when I can upgrade my tool.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I like the way you described that. And since it seems like your current tool set with your notebook there, and even just the combination of your physical notebook and Notion, like
Right.
that already seems like a real powerful combination. But I like what you mentioned, maybe dedicating like some portion of your time to experimenting with the new tools, maybe the digital tools, so that you're at least a little bit comfortable with them, and just so that you know what those tools have to offer, so
Right.
that like in the future there will probably come a time when you'll be working on something where it'll just click and be like, oh, my pen and paper notebook like isn't meeting my needs, but I think that this tool that I've been playing around with might be a better fit. So let's try jumping over to that and giving that a go.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good approach.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Wen, thank you for chatting. Anything else you would like to share before we kind of wrap up our call for today?
I guess it's always nice to find out what you want, but sometimes if you identify this is not a process you are currently need, but it's also a huge plus. So thank you so much.
Yeah, yes, I love that. That's a great closing thought. Well, thanks, Wen. Good chatting with you, and stay in
Yeah.
touch.
Have a nice day.
You,
Bye.
you too. Bye. I hope you enjoyed that conversation, and I encourage you to also seek out that balance of leaning into what's already working for you while also carving out some time to experiment with new tools and new methods that might be useful in the future. In my case, it's exploration of that tool Notion that has me very excited, both for kind of general life productivity and work tasks. But then also, I think using the archive of Notion as a place to store sketch notes and reflections on sketch notes, I think there's a lot of possibility there. So I'm excited to dig in and explore that tool myself. And I hope that you enjoy wherever your explorations take you. If you would like a bit of support in the development of your sketchnoting skills and the use of these types of tools, then come join us within Verbal to Visual. We've got lots of courses available for you there, as well as a pretty awesome community to support you and encourage you along the way. Keep in mind that by joining Verbal to Visual, you also get access to one-on-one coaching calls like these at no additional cost. At some point, I would love to chat with you about the work that you are up to. You can find more information on those resources at verbaltovisual.com and add a /18 to get to the show notes for this specific episode. Thank you so much for listening or watching, and I look forward to sharing another conversation with you next time. Till then.